Hook. In a world where glass ceilings are made of steel and doubt is served daily with morning coffee, one woman's journey from overlooked administrator to emergency commander proves that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are hiding in plain sight. When crisis strikes and leaders fall, it's not the loudest voice or the highest rank that saves the day. It's the quiet strength of someone who never stopped preparing for a moment she wasn't supposed to need. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell had always been the kind of person who arrived 15 minutes early to everything, kept 3 backup plans for every scenario, and knew exactly where every emergency exit was located in any building she entered. At 32, she had spent 8 years in the Military Logistics Division, managing supply chains, coordinating transport operations, and ensuring that thousands of personnel had what they needed when they needed it. But despite her meticulous work and proven track record, she remained firmly planted in what her colleagues lovingly called the background. The morning of March 15th started like any other at Forward Operating Base Meridian. The sun hadn't yet burned through the morning mist. When Sarah arrived at the command center, her boots clicking against the polished concrete floors, she carried her usual armload of reports of supply requisitions and maintenance schedules, each document color-coded and organized with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. The other officers had long since stopped commenting on her organizational obsession, though she occasionally caught them rolling their eyes when she produced yet another perfectly formatted spreadsheet. Commander James Harrison was already at his desk, hunched over a steaming cup of coffee and a pile of intelligence reports. At 51, Harrison was the kind of leader who commanded respect through presence alone. His voice carried the weight of 3 decades of military service, and his decisions were rarely questioned. When he spoke, the room fell silent. When he gave orders, they were followed without hesitation. Sarah had worked under his command for 2 years, and in all that time, their interactions had been limited to brief exchanges about logistics and supply chain issues. "Mitchell," Harrison called out without looking up from his papers, "I need the fuel consumption reports for the Eastern Patrol routes. We're seeing some irregularities in the numbers." Sarah was already pulling the requested documents from her organized files. She had noticed the same irregularities 3 days earlier and had spent her evening hours cross-referencing fuel deliveries with actual consumption rates. "Sir, I have the reports here, along with a preliminary analysis. It appears we have a discrepancy of approximately 12% in Sector 7. I've also prepared recommendations for investigating potential causes." Harrison finally looked up, his weathered face showing a hint of surprise. "You ran an analysis?" "Yes, sir. The data suggested several possible explanations, including equipment malfunction, human error, or," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "other factors that might require investigation." The commander studied her for a moment, then gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Walk me through what you found." For the next 20 minutes, Sarah methodically presented her findings. She had created detailed charts showing consumption patterns, identified specific vehicles and routes where discrepancies occurred, and even prepared a timeline of when the irregularities had begun. Her analysis was thorough, logical, and presented with the kind of clarity that made complex problems seem manageable. "This is good work," Harrison said, leaning back in his chair. "Very good work. How long did this take you?" "About 6 hours, sir, spread over 3 evenings. On your own time?" "Yes, sir. I noticed the patterns during my regular report review and wanted to understand what might be causing them." Harrison nodded slowly, making notes on a pad. "I'll have the intelligence team follow up on your recommendations." "Good initiative, Mitchell." As Sarah returned to her desk, she felt a familiar mixture of satisfaction and frustration. She was proud of her work, pleased that the commander had recognized its value, but also acutely aware that her contributions would likely be absorbed into the larger machinery of command without further acknowledgement. This was the reality she had accepted years ago. Her role was to support, to facilitate, to ensure that others could lead effectively. She had made peace with this position, even as part of her wondered what it might be like to be the one making the crucial decisions, instead of simply providing the information that informed them. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm. Sarah coordinated a supply delivery to an outpost 40 kilometers south, resolved a scheduling conflict between 2 transport units, and updated the master inventory system with new equipment arrivals. She worked with the quiet efficiency that had become her trademark, handling multiple tasks simultaneously while maintaining perfect accuracy in each. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Vance stopped by Sarah's desk around 11. At 45, Vance was one of the few women in senior positions at the base, and she had always been professional but distant in her interactions with Sarah. Today, however, she seemed more approachable.
"I heard Harrison was impressed with your fuel analysis,"
Vance said, settling into the chair beside Sarah's desk. "I hope it proves useful, ma'am. He's not easily impressed, you know. In 2 years, I think I've heard him use the phrase good work maybe 3 times. Vance leaned forward slightly. Have you ever thought about pursuing command training? Sarah felt her heart skip slightly. Command training was the pathway to leadership positions, but it was also notoriously competitive and demanding. More importantly, it required recommendations from senior officers, and Sarah had never believed she had made enough of an impression to earn such support. I've thought about it, ma'am, but I wasn't sure I had the right experience. Experience isn't just about leading from the front, Vance replied.
It's about understanding how all the pieces fit together, anticipating problems before they occur, and being able to make decisions based on incomplete information. From what I've observed, you already do much of that.
The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Major David Chen, the base intelligence officer. Chen was known for his intensity and his tendency to deliver news with dramatic flair, but today he seemed particularly agitated. We have a situation developing, he announced, his voice carrying across the command center. Satellite intelligence shows unusual movement patterns approximately 60 kilometers northeast. It could be nothing, but the timing and coordination suggest possible hostile activity. Harrison emerged from his office, immediately switching into command mode. What kind of movement? Numbers? Equipment? Still analyzing, sir. Initial reports suggest vehicles, possibly 20 to 30 units, moving in a coordinated pattern toward our eastern supply route. They've been maintaining radio silence, which is unusual for routine operations in that area. Sarah found herself automatically pulling up maps and supply schedules on her computer. The eastern supply route was critical to 3 different outposts, and any disruption could create serious logistical challenges. More concerning was the timing. A major resupply convoy was scheduled to use that route tomorrow morning. Mitchell, Harrison called out. I need you to pull up everything we have on tomorrow's eastern convoy. Routes, timing, cargo manifest, security escort details. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard. Within minutes, she had compiled a comprehensive brief that included not just the requested information but also alternative routes, estimated travel times for each option, and an analysis of which cargo items were most critical versus those that could be delayed if necessary. As she printed the reports, she noticed something that made her pause. The coordinates Chen had mentioned for the unusual movement were within 15 kilometers of a secondary supply depot that wasn't on most operational maps. It was a small facility, mainly used for emergency storage and as a refueling point for vehicles that encountered problems on the main route. More importantly, it contained enough ammunition and fuel to supply a significant operation, or to create a substantial security risk if it fell into the wrong hands. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then approached Harrison's desk where he was studying Chen's intelligence reports with Vance and several other officers. Sir, excuse me, but I noticed something about those coordinates. Harrison looked up, his expression suggesting he didn't appreciate the interruption. What is it, Mitchell? The movement patterns Major Chen described. They're very close to Supply Depot 7. It's a smaller facility, but it contains significant ammunition and fuel stores. If someone were planning an operation in this area, that depot would be a valuable target. The room fell silent. Chen quickly consulted his maps, then looked up with surprise. She's right. I didn't notice the depot because it's not marked on the standard tactical maps. How far is it from the reported positions? Sarah had already calculated the distance. Approximately 14 kilometers southeast of the last reported position. If they maintained their speed and heading, they could reach it within 2 hours. Harrison studied the maps more carefully. What's the security status of that depot? Minimal, sir. It's staffed by 4 personnel and has basic perimeter security. It was designed for low-profile operations, not defense against a coordinated attack. The implications were clear to everyone in the room. A small, lightly defended facility containing valuable military supplies located uncomfortably close to potentially hostile movement. Harrison immediately began issuing orders to increase surveillance of the area and to alert the depot personnel to the possible threat. As the command center buzzed with activity, Sarah returned to her desk but found it difficult to focus on her routine tasks. She kept thinking about the tactical situation, running through scenarios in her mind. The eastern supply route wasn't just important for tomorrow's convoy. It was a critical lifeline for 3 outposts that depended on regular resupply. If hostile forces were planning to disrupt that route, the consequences could extend far beyond a single delayed delivery. She pulled up detailed maps of the entire region, studying terrain features, alternative routes, and communication relay points. Her analytical mind automatically began identifying vulnerabilities and potential solutions. Years of logistics work had given her an intimate understanding of how all the moving pieces of military operations fit together, and now she found herself applying that knowledge to tactical considerations. Around 2 in the afternoon, Chen returned with updated intelligence. The movement patterns had continued, and intercepts of scattered communications suggested the presence of organized forces with military-grade equipment. More troubling was the discovery of similar movement patterns in 2 other locations, suggesting a coordinated operation rather than an isolated incident. Harrison called a briefing for all senior staff. Sarah wasn't usually included in tactical briefings, but Vance caught her eye and nodded toward the conference room. Your insights about the depot were valuable. You should hear the rest of this. The briefing was sobering. Intelligence now suggested a multi-pronged operation aimed at disrupting supply lines and potentially capturing military assets. The forces appeared to be well-organized and well-equipped, with the capability to pose a serious threat to base operations. Harrison outlined defensive measures and began discussing the possibility of requesting additional support from higher command. As the discussion progressed, Sarah found herself mentally cataloging the base's resources and capabilities. She knew exactly what equipment was available, which units were at full strength, and how quickly various response options could be implemented. Years of managing logistics had given her a comprehensive understanding of the base's operational capacity, and she realized she might know more about their actual readiness than some of the officers making tactical decisions. When the briefing concluded, the senior staff remained behind to continue planning while the rest of the personnel returned to their duties. Sarah was gathering her notes when Harrison approached her. I want you to prepare a complete resource assessment, he said. Everything: personnel, equipment, ammunition, fuel, food, medical supplies. I need to know exactly what we have and how long we can sustain operations if we're cut off from normal supply lines. This was exactly the kind of comprehensive analysis Sarah excelled at. But the urgency in Harrison's voice made it clear this wasn't a routine planning exercise. How quickly do you need this, sir? I'd like preliminary numbers in 2 hours and a complete assessment by end of day. Yes, sir. I'll have the preliminary report ready. As she returned to her desk, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The situation was serious, potentially dangerous, but it was also the first time her analytical skills were being applied to something more significant than routine logistics. For years, she had wondered if she had the capability to contribute to important decisions. And now she would find out. She began pulling data from multiple systems, cross-referencing inventory records with maintenance schedules, personnel rosters with training certifications, and supply timelines with consumption rates. The work required intense concentration and careful attention to detail, but it was also the kind of challenge that energized her. Each piece of information was like a puzzle piece, and gradually a complete picture of the base's capabilities began to emerge. By 4 o'clock, she had compiled preliminary numbers that painted a clear picture of their readiness status. The base was well supplied in most areas, but there were some concerning gaps. Medical supplies were adequate for routine operations, but might be insufficient for significant casualties. Ammunition stores were good but not exceptional. Most critically, fuel reserves were lower than optimal due to the recent irregularities she had identified in her analysis. As she formatted her preliminary report, Sarah realized she was also developing recommendations for addressing the identified shortfalls. This went beyond what Harrison had requested, but her instincts told her that information without actionable suggestions wasn't as valuable as analysis that included potential solutions. The afternoon sun was beginning to slant through the windows when she printed her preliminary assessment and walked to Harrison's office. He was on a secure telephone call, but gestured for her to enter and wait. As she sat in the chair across from his desk, she could hear fragments of his conversation with what sounded like higher command. The tone was serious, and she caught references to additional intelligence and possible escalation of the threat level. When Harrison finished his call, he immediately focused on her report. For 10 minutes, he read through her analysis in complete silence, occasionally making notes or asking brief clarifying questions. His expression was unreadable, but Sarah could see him processing the implications of what she had compiled. This is thorough, he said finally. Very thorough.
Your recommendations for addressing the fuel situation, how quickly could those be implemented?
The emergency procurement could be initiated within hours, sir. We have authorization for emergency purchases from local suppliers, and I've identified 3 vendors who could deliver within 24 hours.
The longer-term solutions would take several days to implement. Harrison nodded, making additional notes. What about your medical supply concerns? I've identified specific items that could become critical if we experience significant casualties. I've also prepared a request for emergency medical supply delivery, prioritizing the most essential items. You've already prepared the requests? Yes, sir. I thought it would save time if you decided to move forward with any of the recommendations. For the first time that day, Harrison smiled slightly. Initiative, Mitchell. That's exactly what I need right now. He paused, studying her carefully. How do you feel about working late tonight? I have a feeling we're going to need that complete assessment sooner than originally planned. Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline. No problem, sir. I'll stay as long as necessary. As evening approached, the base took on a different atmosphere. Normal daily routines were replaced by heightened security measures and increased communication activity. Sarah worked steadily through her comprehensive assessment, but she was also acutely aware of the growing tension around her. Officers moved with greater urgency. Conversations were conducted in lower tones, and there was an underlying sense that everyone was preparing for something significant. Around 8 o'clock, Chen approached her desk with new intelligence updates. The suspected hostile forces had continued their movements throughout the day, and their patterns were becoming clearer. It appeared they were positioning for coordinated attacks on multiple targets, with the eastern supply route being just one of their objectives. The commander wants you to factor this new information into your assessment, Chen said, handing her a folder of reports. Specifically, he wants to know how long we could sustain operations if we lost all external supply lines for an extended period. This was a more serious scenario than Sarah had originally considered. Losing all supply lines would mean the base would have to survive entirely on existing resources until relief arrived or the threat was eliminated. She immediately began recalculating her projections, factoring in reduced consumption where possible and identifying which resources would become critical first. The work was complex and demanding, but Sarah found herself completely absorbed in the challenge. Every calculation mattered, every assumption could affect lives, and every recommendation might influence crucial decisions. This was the kind of responsibility she had wondered if she could handle. And now she was discovering she not only could handle it, but she was good at it. As she worked through the evening, other personnel gradually left for the day, but the core command staff remained. The base settled into the quiet intensity of night operations, with essential personnel maintaining watch while others prepared for whatever the next day might bring. By 10 o'clock, Sarah had completed her comprehensive assessment. The document was 23 pages long and covered every aspect of the base's sustainability under various threat scenarios. It included detailed recommendations for optimizing resource utilization, prioritizing critical functions, and maintaining operational capability under adverse conditions. But as she reviewed her work one final time, Sarah realized she had also created something more than just a resource assessment. She had developed what amounted to a complete contingency plan for maintaining base operations under siege conditions. It went significantly beyond what Harrison had requested, but her instincts told her this level of detail might be necessary. She was still deciding whether to include her additional analysis when Harrison emerged from a meeting with his senior staff. His expression was grim, and the way he moved suggested they had received troubling news. "Mitchell, is that assessment ready?"
Yes, sir.
She handed him the report, then hesitated. "Sir, I also prepared some additional analysis that goes beyond your original request. Would you like to see that as well?" "What kind of additional analysis?" "Contingency planning for extended siege conditions, sir. Scenarios where we might need to maintain operations without external support for weeks rather than days." The commander's expression shifted from surprise to interest. "Show me." For the next 30 minutes, Sarah walked Harrison through her extended analysis. She had considered scenarios ranging from temporary supply disruption to complete isolation, and for each scenario she had developed specific recommendations for maintaining operational effectiveness. Her planning covered everything from ammunition conservation protocols to emergency medical procedures to food rationing schedules. "Where did you learn to do this kind of analysis?" Harrison asked when she finished. "I didn't learn it anywhere specific, sir. It's just logical progression from standard logistics planning. Once you understand how all the systems work together, you can project how they would perform under different conditions." Harrison studied her for a long moment. "Mitchell, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. If something happened to me and the other senior officers, do you think you could implement these plans?" The question caught Sarah completely off guard. The idea of being responsible for implementing the contingency plan she had created was both terrifying and oddly compelling. I think so, sir. I understand the systems and the relationships between different operational areas, but I've never been tested in that kind of situation. None of us have until we are." Harrison closed her report and looked directly at her. "I'm recommending you for emergency command certification. It's an accelerated program that can be completed in 48 hours if necessary. Are you interested?" Sarah's heart raced. Emergency command certification would qualify her to take charge of base operations if the regular command structure was compromised. It was an enormous responsibility and a level of trust she had never expected to receive. "Yes, sir, I'm very interested. She'll begin your certification process immediately." Harrison paused, then added, "And Mitchell? Keep working on those contingency plans. I have a feeling we're going to need them." As Sarah left the command center that night, she felt as though her entire world had shifted.
24 hours earlier, she had been a logistics officer focused on supply chains and inventory management. Now she was being prepared to potentially take command of an entire military base. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Walking across the moonlit compound to her quarters, Sarah realized that all those years of careful preparation, of maintaining backup plans and understanding how systems interconnected, had been leading to this moment. She had always been ready to step up when needed, she just hadn't known when that need might arise. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, and possibly the test of whether all her preparation had truly prepared her for leadership. But tonight, for the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The quiet efficiency that had defined her career was about to become the foundation for something much larger. And while she didn't yet know it, the events of the next few days would prove that sometimes the most effective leaders are the ones who have been quietly preparing for their moment to lead, even when they never expected that moment to come. Sarah's alarm sounded at 0530, but she had been awake for nearly an hour, her mind racing through the events of the previous day and the challenges that lay ahead. The emergency command certification process was notoriously intensive, designed to rapidly assess whether an officer could handle the complex responsibilities of base leadership under crisis conditions. As she dressed in the pre-dawn darkness, Sarah felt the weight of the opportunity Harrison had given her, along with a growing sense that this certification might be more than just a precautionary measure. The base was already showing signs of increased activity when she made her way to the command center.
Security patrols were more frequent, communications personnel were maintaining extended hours, and there was an underlying tension that suggested everyone understood they might be facing a significant challenge in the coming days. Sarah noticed these details with the same analytical awareness she applied to logistics, but now she was also thinking about what they meant from a command perspective.
Colonel Vance was waiting for her in a conference room adjacent to the main command center, surrounded by manuals, assessment materials, and several laptop computers. At 45, Vance had earned her position through a combination of tactical expertise, administrative skill, and the kind of steady leadership that inspired confidence in both superiors and subordinates. Her approach to Sarah's certification would be thorough but fair, demanding but supportive. "Good morning, Mitchell. Ready for an interesting day?"
Yes, ma'am. I appreciate the opportunity.
"Let's be clear about something from the start," Vance said, settling into her chair. "This certification isn't a formality. The situations we'll be discussing and the scenarios you'll need to navigate are based on real challenges that base commanders face. That's it. Some officers who attempt emergency certification don't pass, and there's no shame in that. Command responsibility isn't for everyone." Sarah nodded, feeling both nervous and determined. "I understand, ma'am. We'll start with theoretical scenarios and progress to practical exercises. I want you to think through each situation carefully, but also remember that in real crises, you often have to make decisions with incomplete information and limited time." Vance opened the first manual. "Let's begin with resource allocation under emergency conditions." For the next 4 hours, Sarah worked through a series of increasingly complex scenarios. She had to make decisions about personnel deployment, resource rationing, communication protocols, and tactical responses to various threats. Some scenarios had clear solutions, but many required her to balance competing priorities and accept difficult trade-offs. What surprised Sarah was how naturally the thinking came to her. Years of logistics work had taught her to consider multiple variables simultaneously, to anticipate problems before they occurred, and to develop contingency plans for various outcomes. These skills translated directly to command decision-making, though the stakes were considerably higher. During one scenario involving a simulated medical emergency with limited resources, Sarah found herself drawing on her comprehensive knowledge of base operations to identify creative solutions. She knew which medical personnel had cross-training in other specialties, which equipment could be repurposed for emergency use, and how to reorganize standard procedures to maximize effectiveness with reduced resources. "Interesting approach," Vance commented as Sarah explained her reasoning. "Most officers focus on the immediate medical response. You're thinking about how to sustain operations while dealing with the crisis. Years of logistics work, ma'am. You learn to think about how disruptions in one area affect everything else." Around noon, Vance called for a break. Sarah had been working steadily for 6 hours, and while she felt mentally sharp, She was also aware of the intensity required to maintain focus on such complex problems. As they walked to the dining facility, Vance shared some insights about command responsibility that went beyond the technical aspects of decision-making.
Command isn't just about making the right decisions, she explained.
It's about making decisions confidently, even when you're not completely certain they're right, and then adapting as new information becomes available. People need to see strength and certainty from their leader, especially during crises. This perspective resonated with Sarah. She had always been someone who thoroughly researched problems before proposing solutions, but she understood that command situations might not allow for extensive analysis. The key would be making the best possible decisions with available information, then remaining flexible enough to adjust course when necessary. They were finishing their lunch when Major Chen approached their table with an expression that suggested new developments in the tactical situation. He glanced at Sarah uncertainly, clearly aware that she was undergoing command certification, but unsure whether she should be included in operational discussions. "It's fine, David," Vance said.
Mitchell is being briefed on current operations as part of her certification. What do you have? Intelligence now confirms coordinated hostile forces in 3 separate locations, and their movements suggest they're preparing for simultaneous operations. Timeline appears to be accelerated, possibly within the next 24 hours. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. The scenario was no longer theoretical. Real decisions would need to be made and real consequences would follow. She found herself automatically thinking through the tactical implications of what Chen had described, considering how the base's defensive capabilities would match up against coordinated attacks from multiple directions.
"Where's Commander Harrison?" Vance asked. "Emergency briefing with Regional Command, ma'am. He's receiving updated intelligence and discussing possible support options." After Chen left, Vance turned to Sarah with a serious expression. "This is why we're doing emergency certification now rather than next month. The situation is fluid, and we need to be prepared for various contingencies." They returned to the conference room, but the afternoon session took on a different character. Instead of working through theoretical scenarios, Vance began presenting Sarah with situations that closely mirrored their current tactical environment. The exercises became more complex, more urgent, and more realistic. One scenario particularly challenged Sarah's thinking. She was presented with a situation where the base was under attack from multiple directions, communication with higher command was severed, and she had to make decisions about deploying defensive resources while also protecting critical infrastructure and personnel. The scenario required her to balance immediate tactical needs with longer-term sustainability concerns. Sarah approached the problem systematically, first identifying the most critical assets that needed protection, then analyzing available defensive resources and their optimal deployment. She considered how to maintain communication between different sections of the base, how to ensure continued operation of essential systems, and how to preserve the capability to sustain operations if the attack were prolonged. "You're taking longer with this one," Vance observed. "Yes, ma'am." The scenario involves multiple competing priorities, and the decisions made in the first few minutes could determine whether we maintain operational capability throughout the crisis. In a real situation, you might not have the luxury of extended analysis. Sarah nodded, understanding the tension between thorough planning and rapid response. "In that case, I would prioritize immediate threats while maintaining flexibility to adapt as the situation developed. The key would be making sure we don't commit resources in ways that prevent us from responding to changing conditions." She then outlined her decision-making process, explaining how she would deploy personnel, establish communication protocols, and maintain coordination between different defensive positions. Her approach showed both tactical awareness and the kind of systematic thinking that could maintain effectiveness under pressure. Vance made detailed notes as Sarah explained her reasoning. "Good. You're thinking like a commander, not just a tactician. You're considering both immediate needs and longer-term implications." By late afternoon, Sarah had completed most of the certification requirements. But Vance had one final exercise. "I want you to review the actual current intelligence about our tactical situation and develop recommendations for Commander Harrison. This isn't theoretical. Whatever you propose could influence real decisions." This was both exciting and intimidating. Sarah would be applying everything she had learned during certification to their genuine strategic challenges. She spent 2 hours reviewing intelligence reports, studying tactical maps, and analyzing the base's defensive capabilities in the context of the identified threats. Her final assessment was comprehensive and detailed. She identified specific vulnerabilities in their defensive posture and recommended modifications that would improve their ability to respond to coordinated attacks. She also proposed changes to communication protocols that would maintain coordination even if primary systems were compromised,
and she outlined resource allocation strategies that would sustain operations under various crisis scenarios.
When she finished, Vance reviewed her recommendations carefully. "This is solid work, Mitchell. You've identified issues that our regular tactical planning hadn't fully addressed. Thank you, ma'am. The logistics perspective gives me insight into systemic vulnerabilities that might not be obvious from a purely tactical viewpoint." That's exactly the kind of comprehensive thinking we need in leadership positions. Vance closed the assessment materials. "Congratulations. You've passed emergency command certification." Sarah felt a rush of relief and accomplishment, but also a growing sense of responsibility. The certification meant she was now qualified to assume command of the base if circumstances required it. But given the current tactical situation, that possibility seemed more real than she had initially expected. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you continue with your regular duties, but you're also part of the command succession plan. If something happens to Commander Harrison or other senior officers, you could find yourself in charge." Vance paused, studying Sarah carefully. "How does that feel? Intimidating, but also energizing." "I've always wondered if I could handle that level of responsibility. Today showed me I probably can."
The certification process is designed to build confidence, as well as assess capability. You've demonstrated both the analytical skills and the decision-making ability needed for command.
Trust in your preparation. As they concluded the certification session, Sarah realized that her perspective on her role at the base had fundamentally shifted. She was no longer just a logistics officer who supported command decisions. She was potentially a commander herself, responsible for the welfare of hundreds of personnel and the success of critical military operations. The evening briefing included the certified officers and senior staff. Commander Harrison had returned from his meeting with Regional Command, and his expression suggested the news wasn't encouraging. As personnel filed into the conference room, Sarah took a seat in the back, still adjusting to her new status. "Intelligence indicates hostile forces will likely initiate operations within the next 12 to 18 hours, Harrison began. "Their objectives appear to include disruption of supply lines, capture of military assets, and possible direct assault on this facility." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't a distant threat or a theoretical exercise. They were facing imminent attack from well-organized, well-equipped forces with multiple objectives. Regional Command is preparing support operations, but weather conditions may delay their arrival. "We need to be prepared to handle the initial phases of any attack independently." Harrison's voice was steady, but Sarah could hear the underlying tension. "All department heads will prepare their personnel for elevated threat conditions. We'll maintain normal operations while implementing enhanced security measures." Major Chen presented updated intelligence showing the specific locations and estimated capabilities of hostile forces. The picture was sobering. They were facing approximately 200 enemy personnel with military-grade equipment, coordination, and apparent knowledge of base operations and vulnerabilities. As the briefing continued, Sarah found herself mentally reviewing the contingency plans she had developed and thinking through how they might need to be modified based on this new intelligence. Her certification had given her the authority to contribute to tactical planning, but she was still uncertain about when and how to offer input. The answer came when Harrison asked for department assessments of readiness status. Each section leader reported on their preparation levels, identified any concerns, and outlined their response capabilities. When the logistics assessment came up, Harrison looked directly at Sarah. "Mitchell, you've had the most comprehensive view of our resource situation. What's your assessment of our readiness for extended operations?" Sarah stood, feeling the weight of attention from the room's senior leadership. "Sir, based on yesterday's analysis and today's updated intelligence, we're well positioned for initial response operations. Our primary challenges will be ammunition resupply if engagement is prolonged, fuel management if we lose access to external deliveries, and medical support if we experience significant casualties." She went on to outline specific recommendations for optimizing resource utilization and maintaining operational capability under various attack scenarios. Her assessment was thorough, practical, and delivered with the confidence that came from knowing she had prepared extensively for exactly these kinds of situations. "Thank you, Mitchell. Your logistics assessment will be crucial for tactical planning." Harrison made notes, then looked around the room. "Any questions about readiness status or response protocols?" Lieutenant Colonel Vance raised her hand. "Sir, I'd like to note that Lieutenant Mitchell has completed emergency command certification today. She's now qualified for inclusion in command succession planning." This announcement created a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. Several officers turned to look at Sarah with new interest, recognizing that she had moved from support personnel to potential leadership.
Harrison nodded approvingly, and Sarah felt both pride and nervousness about her new status. Good.
Having additional certified command capability will be important given the tactical situation. Harrison stood signaling the end of the formal briefing.
Department heads will remain for tactical coordination. Everyone else should return to your sections and ensure your personnel understand the current threat level.
As officers began filing out of the conference room, Sarah hesitated, uncertain whether she should stay or leave. Her certification qualified her for command responsibilities, but her current assignment was still logistics coordination.
Mitchell, Harrison called out, I'd like you to remain for tactical planning. Your resource analysis will be essential for developing our response strategies. This was the moment Sarah realized her role had truly changed. She was no longer an observer or supporter of tactical planning. She was a participant in it. The decisions made in the next few hours would determine how effectively they could respond to the coming attack, and her input would help shape those decisions. The tactical planning session lasted until nearly midnight. Sarah contributed analysis and recommendations that helped refine defensive strategies, optimize resource allocation, and develop contingency plans for various attack scenarios. Her comprehensive understanding of base operations proved valuable in identifying both vulnerabilities and opportunities that purely tactical thinking might miss.
As the session concluded, Sarah felt exhausted but also energized. She had spent 18 hours engaged in the most challenging and consequential work of her career, and she had proven to herself that she could handle the responsibility.
More importantly, she had earned the confidence of the senior leadership team and established herself as a valuable contributor to critical decision-making. Walking back to her quarters through the quiet base, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her situation had changed in just 2 days.
She had begun the week as a logistics officer focused on supply chain management. Now she was a certified commander contributing to tactical planning for an imminent military operation. The thought was both thrilling and sobering.
Tomorrow would bring real challenges, real dangers, and real consequences. All of her preparation, all of her analytical work, and all of her careful planning would be tested against actual combat conditions.
She would discover whether her theoretical understanding of command responsibility translated effectively to real-world leadership under pressure. But as she prepared for what might be her last full night of sleep for some time, Sarah felt ready for whatever came next.
Years of quiet competence had prepared her for this moment. Even though she hadn't known this moment would come, the logistics officer who had always been ready with backup plans and comprehensive analysis was now ready to put those skills to the ultimate test.
The base around her hummed with quiet activity as personnel prepared for the challenges ahead. Equipment was checked and rechecked. Communication systems were tested. Defensive positions were reviewed. And everyone made final preparations for what intelligence suggested would be a long and difficult day. Sarah fell asleep thinking through contingency plans and resource allocation strategies, her mind still working even as her body rested. In a few hours, she would face the greatest test of her career and discover whether all her preparation had truly prepared her for command under fire. She was as ready as anyone could be for such a challenge, but like every leader throughout history, she would only truly know her capabilities when the moment arrived to demonstrate them. The attack began at 0347, with a coordinated mortar barrage that shattered the pre-dawn quiet and sent personnel scrambling for defensive positions. Sarah was already awake, having been unable to sleep deeply with the anticipation of imminent action, when the first explosions echoed across the compound. She dressed quickly in the darkness, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system, and made her way to the command center through corridors filled with running personnel and urgent voices. Commander Harrison was already coordinating the initial response when Sarah arrived, his voice calm and authoritative as he issued orders and received reports from various sections of the base. The command center had transformed overnight into a true war room, with additional communication equipment, tactical displays, and monitoring stations that would be essential for managing a complex defensive operation. Mitchell, I need a real-time assessment of how this initial attack is affecting our operational capabilities. Harrison called out as she took her position at a workstation. Focus on communication systems, power infrastructure, and access routes. Sarah immediately began pulling data from multiple sources, coordinating with section leaders to understand the extent of damage and its implications for their ability to maintain organized resistance. The mortar attack had been precisely targeted, hitting key infrastructure points rather than personnel areas, which suggested the attackers had detailed intelligence about base operations. Sir, they've hit the main communication array and the backup power generation facility, she reported after 10 minutes of intensive data gathering. Primary communications are down, but we still have secondary systems operational. Power is at 60% capacity, which should be sufficient for essential operations.
Whoa, what about access routes?
The main gate area took direct hits, and the eastern perimeter road has crater damage that will impede vehicle movement. However, the western and southern routes remain clear. Harrison nodded grimly. They know exactly what they're doing. This wasn't random targeting.
He turned to Major Chen, who was coordinating intelligence updates. What are we seeing in terms of follow-up activity?
Ground forces are advancing from 3 directions, sir.
Estimated strength is consistent with previous intelligence, approximately 200 personnel with military-grade equipment. They're moving in coordinated formations, suggesting professional training. Sarah found herself automatically thinking through the tactical implications while continuing to monitor infrastructure status. The attackers had clearly planned this operation carefully, using the mortar barrage to degrade defensive capabilities before initiating ground assault. It was a professional approach that demanded an equally professional response. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of urgent activity. Sarah coordinated damage control efforts while simultaneously tracking resource consumption and maintaining real-time assessments of operational capability. Her workstation became a hub of critical information, with officers regularly checking with her for updates on everything from ammunition levels to communication system status. Around 0600, the situation took a dramatic turn for the worse. Major Chen received reports that the eastern defensive position was under heavy assault and requesting immediate reinforcement. At the same time, sensors indicated movement toward the western perimeter, suggesting a coordinated attempt to overrun defensive positions through simultaneous pressure on multiple fronts. Harrison was coordinating the response to these developments when Sarah noticed something troubling in the communication traffic. Reports from the eastern position had become increasingly fragmented, and several check-ins had been missed. More concerning was that the senior officer commanding that section, Captain Rodriguez, hadn't been heard from in over 20 minutes. "Sir," Sarah called out, "I'm not receiving consistent communication from the eastern defensive position." The last clear transmission was 23 minutes ago. Harrison immediately tried to establish contact with Rodriguez, but received only static and occasional fragments of transmission. Chen attempted to contact other personnel in that section with similar results. The eastern position, which was critical to preventing enemy forces from accessing the main compound, appeared to be compromised. "We need to re-establish contact and assess the situation," Harrison decided. "Mitchell, what's the quickest way to get reinforcements to that position while maintaining security for the rest of the compound?" Sarah had been anticipating this question and had already analyzed possible routes and resource allocations. The most secure approach would be through the maintenance tunnel system that connects to the eastern sector. A small team could move undetected and assess the situation before committing larger forces. How long would that take? Approximately 15 minutes to reach the eastern position, assuming no resistance in the tunnels. Harrison was considering this option when another crisis demanded immediate attention. The base's primary medical facility reported that they were treating casualties from the initial mortar attack and were requesting additional medical supplies that needed to be moved from secondary storage locations under potentially dangerous conditions. As Harrison juggled these multiple urgent demands, Sarah noticed that he was showing signs of the tremendous stress he was under. He had been functioning at peak intensity for hours, making critical decisions under enormous pressure while coordinating complex operations across multiple fronts.
His voice remained steady and his decisions were sound, but Sarah could see the physical and mental toll of command responsibility in crisis conditions.
At 0647, everything changed in an instant.
Harrison was coordinating the medical supply movement when he suddenly staggered, his hand going to his chest. For a moment he tried to continue speaking, but then his knees buckled and he collapsed to the floor of the command center. The room froze for a heartbeat before exploding into controlled chaos. Medical personnel were immediately summoned while officers surrounded Harrison, who was conscious but clearly in severe distress. Sarah found herself moving without conscious thought, her mind automatically shifting into crisis management mode even as part of her felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. Lieutenant Colonel Vance, as the next senior officer present, immediately assumed tactical command. "I need an assessment of Harrison's condition and an estimate of how long before he can resume command," she ordered the medical personnel who had rushed to his side. The medic's response was sobering. "Ma'am, this appears to be a cardiac episode. He needs immediate medical attention and should not be considered available for duty until we can conduct a complete evaluation." Vance's expression tightened as she absorbed the implications. With Harrison incapacitated and the base under active assault from well-organized forces, command responsibility had shifted to her.
But Sarah noticed something that made her stomach clench with anxiety. Vance looked pale and seemed to be favoring her left arm in a way that suggested she might be experiencing her own medical issues.
Colonel, Sarah said quietly, approaching Vance. Are you feeling all right? I'm fine, Vance replied automatically, but Sarah could see perspiration on her forehead despite the cool temperature in the command center.
I need to focus on coordinating our defensive response. Over the next 30 minutes, Vance maintained command effectively, making necessary decisions and coordinating defensive operations with the competence expected of her rank and experience. However, Sarah could see that she was struggling physically and her decision-making was becoming increasingly labored.
The crisis reached its peak when reports came in that enemy forces had broken through the eastern perimeter and were advancing toward critical infrastructure. At the same time, the western defensive position reported that they were under heavy assault and might not be able to maintain their position without immediate reinforcement.
Vance was analyzing these reports and preparing to deploy the base's reserve forces when she suddenly went very pale and reached out to steady herself against the nearest workstation. Colonel? Sarah was immediately at her side, along with the medic who had been treating Harrison.
I think I need to sit down, Vance said, her voice strained.
The medic quickly assessed her condition. Ma'am, your blood pressure is elevated and you're showing signs of severe stress response. I strongly recommend immediate medical attention.
Vance looked around the command center, her eyes taking in the tactical displays, the busy communication stations, and the ongoing crisis that demanded immediate leadership. I can't step down now. The base is under attack. Colonel, Sarah said, her voice calm but firm, you need medical attention. I'm certified for emergency command and familiar with all current operations. I can maintain tactical coordination while you receive treatment. For a moment, Vance hesitated, and Sarah could see the internal struggle between her sense of duty and her recognition of her physical limitations. Around them, the command center continued its urgent activity, but several staff members had noticed the situation and were waiting to see how command responsibility would be resolved. Mitchell, Vance said finally, you're absolutely certain you can handle this. Sarah felt a moment of vertigo as she realized she was about to assume command of an entire military base in the middle of a coordinated enemy assault. Every decision she made in the next few hours could mean the difference between successful defense and catastrophic defeat. But as she looked around the command center and thought about all the personnel depending on effective leadership, her uncertainty resolved into determined focus. Yes, ma'am, I'm ready. Vance nodded, then turned to address the command center staff. Attention. I am temporarily transferring tactical command to Lieutenant Mitchell, who has current emergency command certification and comprehensive knowledge of our operational status. Follow her orders as you would mine. With those words, Sarah found herself in command of forward operating base Meridian during its greatest crisis. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but her mind immediately shifted into the analytical mode that had defined her entire career. She had been preparing for this moment without knowing it, and now all of her planning, all of her systematic thinking, and all of her comprehensive understanding of base operations would be put to the ultimate test. Major Chen, she said, her voice steady despite the enormity of the situation, I need an immediate update on all defensive positions and current enemy locations. Enemy forces are approximately 400 meters from the main compound. Western position is under heavy assault but maintaining defensive integrity. Southern perimeter remains secure. Sarah moved to the central tactical display, her mind automatically processing the information and identifying the most critical priorities. Communications officer, establish contact with regional command and inform them of our command situation and current tactical status. Medical officer, what's our current casualty count and available capacity? As reports came in from various sections, Sarah began forming a comprehensive picture of their situation. It was challenging, but not hopeless. They had sufficient personnel and resources to maintain effective defense if properly coordinated, but success would depend on making the right tactical decisions under extreme pressure. All section leaders, this is Lieutenant Mitchell assuming tactical command. She announced over the base communication system, I need immediate status reports from all defensive positions and any changes in enemy activity. The responses came quickly and painted a clear picture of their tactical situation. The eastern breach was the immediate threat, but committing too many resources to address it could leave other positions vulnerable to coordinated assault. Sarah needed to balance immediate threats against longer-term defensive sustainability. Drawing on all of her analytical training and her comprehensive knowledge of base operations, Sarah began issuing orders that would reorganize their defensive posture to address the current crisis while maintaining flexibility for changing conditions. I want 3rd Platoon deployed to reinforce the eastern sector through the maintenance tunnel approach we discussed earlier, she ordered. They are to assess the situation and establish a new defensive line between enemy forces and critical infrastructure. 4th Platoon will provide mobile reserve capability, positioned to respond quickly to pressure on either western or southern perimeters. All ammunition and supply distribution will be coordinated through logistics control to ensure optimal resource allocation. As her orders were acknowledged and implemented, Sarah felt the command center settling into a new rhythm under her leadership. Personnel who had worked with her for years now looked to her for tactical guidance, and she could see both confidence and determination in their responses. The next 2 hours tested every aspect of Sarah's preparation and capability.
Enemy forces continued their coordinated assault, probing for weaknesses and attempting to exploit the apparent confusion caused by the leadership transition. But instead of confusion, they encountered increasingly organized and effective resistance coordinated by someone who understood every aspect of base operations and defensive capability.
Sarah's logistics background proved invaluable in ways she hadn't expected. Her comprehensive knowledge of supply lines, equipment capabilities, and personnel qualifications allowed her to optimize defensive effectiveness in ways that purely tactical thinking might miss. She knew which ammunition types were most effective against the enemy equipment intelligence had identified. She understood which personnel had cross-training that could be utilized in emergency situations. She could coordinate maintenance support for defensive equipment in ways that maintained maximum operational capability. When the Western defensive position requested emergency ammunition resupply under fire, Sarah was able to coordinate a support operation that not only delivered the needed supplies but also repositioned additional equipment to strengthen their defensive posture. When communication systems experienced interference that threatened coordination between defensive positions, she implemented backup protocols that maintained effective command and control. Most critically, when enemy forces attempted a coordinated breakthrough operation designed to overwhelm multiple defensive positions simultaneously, Sarah recognized the pattern early and was able to coordinate countermeasures that turned the enemy's coordination against them. All positions, this is base command, she announced as sensors indicated the beginning of the coordinated assault. Enemy forces are initiating simultaneous pressure on eastern and western perimeters. This is their main effort. Defensive positions will implement Coordinated Response Protocol 7. Mobile reserves will deploy according to predetermined support patterns. The coordinated response she had developed drew on detailed knowledge of defensive capabilities, optimal communication protocols, and resource allocation strategies that maximize their ability to maintain effective resistance against superior numbers. Enemy forces found themselves facing not scattered defensive positions but a coordinated defensive network that responded to their movements with professional precision. By 1100 hours, the tide of battle had clearly shifted. Enemy forces, having failed to achieve breakthrough despite their initial advantages, began showing signs of reduced coordination and effectiveness. Their assault had been based on achieving quick success through superior planning and coordination, but Sarah's defensive response had negated these advantages and forced them into a prolonged engagement they weren't prepared to sustain. Regional Command finally made contact around 11:30, reporting that support forces were en route and should arrive within 2 hours. The enemy forces, apparently aware of this development through their own intelligence, began showing signs of preparing for withdrawal.
Ma'am, Major Chen reported, long-range sensors indicate enemy forces are consolidating in assembly areas consistent with preparation for organized withdrawal. Sarah felt a wave of relief but maintained her focus on ensuring effective coordination until the threat was completely resolved. All defensive positions maintain current posture until enemy withdrawal is confirmed.
We don't want them to exploit any assumption of success on our part. Over the next hour, enemy forces conducted an organized withdrawal that confirmed their professional training but also demonstrated their recognition that the assault had failed to achieve its objectives. The base had successfully defended against a coordinated attack by numerically superior forces through effective leadership, optimal resource utilization, and coordinated response. As the immediate threat receded, Sarah finally allowed herself to fully absorb what had happened. In the span of 4 hours, she had assumed command of a military base under assault and successfully coordinated a defense against professional enemy forces. The logistics officer who had begun the week managing supply chains had emerged as a combat commander who had proven capable of handling the ultimate test of military leadership. Commander Harrison, having received medical treatment and cleared for limited duty, returned to the command center as the crisis concluded. His recovery was encouraging, though he would need extended medical evaluation before resuming full command responsibilities. "Mitchell," he said, approaching her position at the central tactical display. "I understand you've been coordinating our defense for the past 4 hours." "Yes, sir. The situation has been stabilized, and regional support should arrive within the hour. Harrison studied the tactical displays and damage reports. You've done exceptional work under impossible circumstances. I couldn't have coordinated a more effective defense myself. Thank you, sir. The preparation you and Colonel Vance provided through the certification process made all the difference. The certification process provided the framework, Harrison corrected, but the leadership you demonstrated today came from something much deeper. You've proven that you don't just understand how to support command decisions, you understand how to make them. As the afternoon progressed and regional support forces arrived to ensure continued security, Sarah gradually transferred tactical coordination back to the regular command structure. But she knew that her role at the base had fundamentally changed. She was no longer the logistics officer who happened to have emergency command certification. She was a proven combat commander who had successfully led under the most challenging possible circumstances.
Lieutenant Colonel Vance, having received medical treatment and been cleared for duty, approached Sarah as the formal transfer of command was completed. I want you to know that assuming command in that situation took tremendous courage and capability.
You saved this base and possibly hundreds of lives. I had excellent preparation and outstanding personnel to work with, ma'am. You had those things, but you also had something that can't be taught or trained. The ability to remain calm under extreme pressure and make sound decisions when everything depends on being right.
Vance paused, choosing her words carefully. I'm recommending you for permanent promotion to command rank and assignment to advanced leadership training.
Would you be interested in that path? Sarah felt a surge of emotion as she considered the offer. A week earlier, she had been focused on supply chain management and inventory control.
Now, she was being offered the opportunity to pursue military command as her primary career path. The transformation was both thrilling and humbling.
Yes, ma'am, I'm very interested. As evening settled over the base, Sarah found herself reflecting on the extraordinary events of the past few days. The emergency had tested every aspect of her preparation, her analytical abilities, her decision-making capability, and her capacity for leadership under pressure. More importantly, it had revealed capabilities she hadn't been certain she possessed.
Walking through the compound as damage control efforts continued and normal operations gradually resumed, Sarah realized that she had discovered something fundamental about herself. All of those years of careful preparation, comprehensive planning, and systematic analysis hadn't just been good logistics practice. They had been preparation for leadership that she hadn't recognized she was developing.
The quiet efficiency that had defined her career had evolved into something much more significant. The ability to see the complete picture, understand how all the pieces fit together, and coordinate complex operations under pressure. The backup plans and contingency analysis that had seemed like professional thoroughness had actually been leadership training disguised as logistics work. Most importantly, she had learned that effective leadership wasn't about having all the answers or making perfect decisions. It was about making the best possible decisions with available information, adapting to changing circumstances and maintaining coordination between people and resources under challenging conditions. The base around her showed signs of the day's challenges: damaged buildings, disrupted operations, and personnel who had been tested by genuine combat conditions. But it also showed signs of successful resistance, effective coordination, and the kind of professional competence that emerged when people worked together under capable leadership. As Sarah prepared for what would undoubtedly be many hours of after-action reporting and operational assessment, she felt profoundly grateful for the opportunity she had been given and deeply satisfied with her response to it. The logistics officer who had always been ready with backup plans had proven ready for the ultimate backup plan, taking command when leaders fell and responsibility demanded immediate action. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, and new opportunities for growth in her evolving career. But tonight, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true calling. Years of being told to stay in her lane had ended with the discovery that her lane was wider and more important than anyone, including herself, had ever imagined. The transformation was complete. The woman who had spent years supporting other people's decisions had proven she could make the decisions that mattered most. And in doing so, she had not only saved her base and her personnel, she had discovered who she was truly meant to be.